Welcome everyone to another Ken Reads episode that's being done on Instagram today as opposed to being directly on Spotify. It's gonna get there, but I wanted to do this as a live today as opposed to just a recording because I enjoy lives, I enjoy doing Q&A. There's going to be a Q&A for this episode as well too, so hooray for extra length on the person who sent this letter, so you're getting your cake and eating it too. Now, just to let everyone know before I dive straight into this letter, I actually read this one out and then realized I accidentally kept the person's name in it. So this is going to be round 2, and it's going to be maintaining the privacy and confidentiality of this person because that didn't happen the first time I did this. So hoping that on this occasion, I don't accidentally tell this person's name again. And I will also take the opportunity to discuss emotional unavailability in relation to avoidant attachment at the back end. And if I've got time for Q&A, I will happily get around to your questions. So feel free as always to pile up your questions in the question mark box below. This letter is a little on the lengthier side, so I may do commentary as I'm reading from it. And if you have any thoughts and feelings with regards to this letter, please throw them in the chat because I will happily read them out where appropriate. But with all that out of the way, let's get into Susan's letter and get straight into this. Okay, so Susan writes, "Hi Ken, hope you're well. I could use your wisdom and advice, please. I'm 40 years old as a woman and almost 4 years ago during lockdown met a 43-year-old guy online who was a podcaster. Relatable. I was a fan of his work and we started chatting and got closer and closer until we were talking every day and night. After a year or so, when we'd gotten closer, he told me he did not want to be in a relationship with anyone, which I accepted, but the last 3 years we have acted as though we're in a relationship anyway. We know each other inside out, he is self-employed and changed his hours to be on my time zone right from the start. He told me not too long ago that he was avoidant. I had never heard of it before, but researched it, and even though I understood what it was, I didn't see much of it from him. I'm guessing that being in a long-distance relationship setup meant we never came across the problems that couples together do in real life. Yep. In fact, the majority of the time, it was him who was needy, running to me for comfort, pep talks, affection. I'm smiling, by the way, because, you know, for those of you who know, particularly with those fearful avoidance sort of tendencies, you'll know the signs of this sort of stuff as it's obviously playing out for Susan. So she describes how he was needy, running to me for comfort, wanted pep talks, affection, obviously through words. He would disappear from his online podcast fan base for weeks at a time, Jesus, when it got too much, but would still be with me, in emails or voice calls. He was vulnerable, sweet, and caring. I fell totally in love with him. I leaned slightly anxious, but honestly, I enjoyed caring for him from afar as I got to live my own life, make all my own decisions, and I felt that what I was getting out of this online relationship met my needs and soothed my soul without having to accommodate someone in my real life. That right there is what we call the subconscious fear of intimacy for those of us that lean anxiously attached. I will touch on that a little down the line, but that is very much a thing, so be very careful if you resonate with that. Let's see. Let's see myself. It worked well for us both. I bet it did. He told me he was severely abused by his parents. I was too, but nowhere near as bad as he told me. But I don't know the full details. He also told me he has pushed away every friend he ever had because he can turn on a dime on people. But this wasn't something I really experienced with him, so stupidly, I thought I was safe. Now, to be fair to you, Susan, I think a lot of people understandably think that, you know, when you get that close to someone who's being vulnerable and telling you that, you're going to be okay. So, lesson learned, unfortunately, and I predict that this is something that'll come out later on. I guess I also thought that if he is aware of being avoidant, he would be aware of pushing me away or be working on it. Oh no, not necessarily. I know his last big relationship was years ago and they were due to move into... I know his last big relationship was years ago and they were due to move to another country together, but something happened at the last minute and she went without him. I have a sneaking suspicion he might have done this to her too and broken up with her abruptly. Okay, I'm going to take a moment here just to unpack a few things because we're already getting the basis for what the future is looking like in this relationship. So we have a lot of really good intensity between this couple, between Susan and this guy who I believe leans fearful avoidant. The reason as to why I believe he leans fearful avoidant is the fact that he's, constantly texting Susan. He appears needy. He wants reassurance. He wants pep talks. And that's not something we would normally see from someone who's leaning more dismissive avoidant, on the basis that if you're picking up the fact that he's coming across quite intensely in the beginning, suggests to me that there's definitely a line of needing a lot of emotional acceptance and validation. I also want to say, please everyone understand this. Please understand that if an avoidant attacher or anyone with anything tells you, I have HIV, I have bipolar, I have, Mercury's retrograde, it does not mean they have a plan for what they're experiencing. And it's not to say that, it's bad of them to self-disclose. I love the fact that these people, particularly this guy, disclose that he has an avoidant attachment style. But just because you are aware of the thing that you have is not enough to actually help the relationship. You also need to have a plan, accountability, and ensure that you're also not going to let that part of you be destructive for the partner you're with and also for yourself, because that leads into the realm of abuse. Just because you have something doesn't get you off scot-free without taking radical accountability for the thing that you have. So already with Susan's, letter, in the early stages of dating, we can already see that, this guy is presenting as someone who's reasonably attentive, someone who obviously wants to support, a lot of hand-holding, and he doesn't seem to be acting avoidant on the basis that they're not together in real life. It's all long distance at this particular time, yet he doesn't want to be in a relationship a year in. There's obviously a bit of red flag stuff coming up here too. So, Susan, out of respect to you, I understand that this guy is saying to you, I've had a history of backing away from all my closest friends. I'm avoidantly attached. The thing is, to be fair to you, Susan, this stuff, attachment theory, is frankly reduced to what people would refer to as pop psychology in most circles. It was a paragraph in my psychology course, and it's not something that we clinicians get taught about extensively. And those of us that go on to date people with insecure attachment learn the hard way that this is something that's quite prevalent. So I just want to say out of fairness to you, Susan, that even though, you might look back and go, I should have seen all of this for what it was, you didn't know what you didn't know. But one thing I'm going to bring to your attention just to be very mindful of if you're ever in a situation like this again is, I know you said it felt okay to not be, in a relationship where you were together all the time. It was just the way it was. We had our distance. It was great. Please be aware that those of us that lean anxiously attached have a tendency to spend way too much time in what I'm calling now fictitious relationships that aren't making any steps to be real, to be, working on establishing a proper relationship. I'm going to take a pause here to say, someone here has written, I feel like calling them avoidance is almost like sugarcoating narcissism. Not at all. Not at all. They're quite separate things, even though they have overlap. That's a story for another day. Anyways, I want to make it very clear that it is very easy for us to have a subconscious desire to chase unavailable people because it's actually in our comfort zone to try and chase people who won't accept us. So please bear in mind that even though it's possible for us to find something that feels okay in some of these dynamics because they might meet our needs in certain phases of our life, please be aware that sometimes this can fall into a pattern of wasting our energy, resources, and love for people who are not going to reciprocate it for us. and then we'll end up continuing to reject people who would actually love and treat us well. It can be our kryptonite as anxiously attached people to not really enjoy having love from someone who's ready and available, because in our wiring, we might be still more interested in someone where we feel like there's a challenge and we have to work towards it. So that's my very reductive way of saying be careful of subconscious fear of intimacy, because it can lead to situations like this, especially if you're ignorant of attachment stuff. And again, I want to make it very clear to you, Susan, I'm not blaming you. It's not your fault. You didn't know what you didn't know, but just be mindful of this going forward. Anyways, let's continue. So Susan writes, we occasionally had arguments, normally things brought up by him, which we were always able to work through, or so I thought. The last big argument we had was a few months ago. I felt he was nitpicking me over something, and he talked me down from having a major fight. He told me he adored me too much for us to not fix this particular issue, and we repaired it well, and I thought we were in a great place. 1 month ago, I was headed to his country on a work trip, so we planned that while I was there. I would visit him for a few days over his birthday. We had this plan for about 3 months and were both so excited, counting down the days and talking about all our plans. I bought him a birthday gift he'd wanted since childhood. Cakes, candles, hired a beautiful Airbnb. 2 days before the trip, he sent me a selfie, which I complimented, and then he just exploded. He sent me rageful emails, ranting about completely unrelated things, said some really nasty stuff, which I don't know if he truly believes, but he'd never brought it up before. He really went for the jugular with the things he said, calling me an abuser, just like your mother, that I was desperate and he'd been pretending to be my e-boyfriend. Yeah, sure. That I'd been using him, and how could I have thought he'd want to spend a weekend with me, and belittled me over a huge recent work achievement I'd had that he knew meant so much to me and I was really proud of. I never imagined he could go as low as these depths. He wouldn't let me respond, told me to leave him alone, and then vanished. Okay. I want to just say that I'm really, really sorry that this is what you experienced. This is terrifying. And I think what's really scary about this is that you had escalated this relationship with this guy where you're giving him things that he really, really seemed to want. Cake, birthday, lovely Airbnb. You're giving him something that he probably hadn't experienced growing up. And to me, it seems like obviously he'd made this quite clear to you, right? And then all of a sudden he goes into a spiral where he rages after sending a selfie of you. And what's really fascinating to me about this, not from the perspective of how much damage it did to you, is actually more the how this feels like extreme fearful avoidance sort of stuff. And he even spelled this out to you as well as something that he's done before. It seems to me like things have gotten to such a beautiful place and he lost it. And it doesn't seem like, even when he's saying things to you like, oh, you were never real to me, I was just making it out like you were my e-girlfriend. When I hear that, I'm just thinking, this just sounds like rationalizing and also projected rage. I suspect when he's saying you're controlling and your achievements don't matter and you're just like your mother, I think what he means to say is you're just like my mother. I'm raging at you because I can't handle all of what you're doing to me. I also suspect too the reason he was saying you're controlling is because I would imagine that he probably hasn't had many great experiences with seemingly kind gestures in the past that didn't have some emotional strings attached. So the fact that he used the word control suggests to me he's probably had a history of having particular people, maybe a very abusive mum, control him in the past. But still, you didn't need to cop that really vile projection from this guy. So not okay. And I want to circle back because I understand that before someone was saying this is sort of like sugar-coated narcissism, just one explosion of rage, as well as a fear of intimacy moment, as well as like all of this other stuff, does not a narcissist make. Yes, he was gaslighting. Yes, he was having an explosive and also very abusive moment with Susan. But just that incident by itself, for me, and I can't make this diagnosis, no clinician could without obviously having this dude in front of them, is not enough evidence to me to be like, you are absolutely a narcissist. I'd say its behavior is definitely narcissistic. It's on the spectrum. But I don't think there's enough of that instability throughout the entire relationship. It's still very much in fearful avoidant land for me, exclusively, with a little other stuff going on around the side as well too. But that rage, my God, that is like projection 11 out of 10 for you. That's terrible. Like, that's really, really bad. And I do think that you'd obviously gotten to such a good place for him to do that. A video I did ages ago was describing how avoidant attachers and anxious attachers may not be able to handle acts of kindness without having, uncomfortable feelings arise as a consequence. And I want to take a moment here to say that when it comes to insecure attachers and their relationship with kindness, love, reciprocity, it's something that we can struggle with if we never really had good experiences of it growing up. And I know a lot of people, when they've done really lovely gestures for their avoidant partners, have often had whack responses in return, where they've been like, why the hell are you acting mean, disparaging, rude, in this case, rageful after such a beautiful time away for your birthday? And the answer is a lot of them don't. There's a lot of things going on. One, like I said before, for this particular person, there's obviously feelings of like, you're trying to control me. Two, I wouldn't be surprised for him as well that he doesn't feel worthy of such kind acts, and his default is to think this is the worst case scenario and you're gonna do something to me that will hurt me. I also think for a lot of avoidant attachers, it's something where when there are gifts being received, they often feel like, oh shit, things are now starting to get real. And a lot of fearful avoidants have shared with me that when they start to feel like there's an emotional connection forming, that puts them in a position where they feel weak, vulnerable, and like they could be in a position to be really hurt. And the context for where those explanations came from was for a subject that wasn't entirely related to this one. It was more on if an avoidant attacher is going through a tough time, stress with work, family issues, they're more likely to dump their partner. And the answers that came out of that were really fascinating from the fearful avoidance, where they were saying, oh yeah, we do this because we have, like, whilst we may not have control over our lives, we have control over the relationship, or so we perceive we do. We also don't want to feel like you have some control over us by giving you any sign of our discomfort. We also feel like if we give you any of our emotional discomfort, it's going to feel like a burden. So in this context, I'm plucking a few of those elements from that example into this to say, I could see how for someone who's a fearful avoidant, who's got lots of mother issues from the sounds of it, lots of unprocessed rage, hell, I wouldn't even be surprised if he also has some underlying misogyny. I can understand how a lot of that just exploded after this experience where you'd spent that wonderful time celebrating his birthday. But I am not making excuses for it, because the consequence is still, it's abusive. Not okay. He knows he does this. He has an avoidant attachment. Why ain't he in therapy working on himself? Not okay. So just wanted to put it out there and say this is completely whack sort of behavior. All right, let's continue with what Susan has to say. The shock of it all sent my nervous system into a really bad place where it caused me to lose 20 pounds in 2 weeks. I'm so sorry, that's terrible. And also, unfortunately, not uncommon in a lot of these cases. Or it can go the other way too. Like, you can actually have massive weight gain off the back of this. Hooray, binge eating. I could not process it. A week or so after my anxious attachment took over, and I sent an email over-explaining myself, but not asking for reconciliation, and 2 weeks later he sent me an email in a completely different tone, telling me how wonderfully he's doing, how great he feels, the best he's ever felt in years, and that some time needs to pass before we have the big settle everything conversation. I felt like being dumped is one thing, but the rage and blindsiding of his email just was something else. And it was all 2 days before I was due to fly to him. And just because I complimented his selfie knocked me so sideways that I just don't know how to handle it. Well, understandably, you're probably in a significant shock. And I'm really, really sorry that you've gone through that. It's pretty awful to go through an experience like that, where you've just had, you're probably feeling like, right, okay, I think I know the lay of the land. We have our issues. I think we can solve anything. He's told me he's avoidant. Hasn't come out now. He suggests that he's seen how these patterns play out. Not happening to me right now. And then, literally, I'm laughing because of how predictable it is. Literally, as things have just gotten to a place where they're starting to feel like, yep, we're all coming together in a much more romantic way, even though he hasn't called, you his, he hasn't officialized a relationship. It's like, there we go. That's when he explodes. And this is where it all goes downhill from there. Now, him saying to you in that email, I'm in the most amazing place right now, and I'm in such a great spot. I suspect that when he wrote that email, he was in that relief phase off the back of leaving the relationship with you. And even, by the way, I want to make it clear, just because he thinks he wasn't in a relationship with you, he absolutely was. Let's not out-rationalize the reality of the situation. He can say whatever mind-bending things he wants to not make commitment happen, but the reality is that you both were absolutely in a relationship. And I also want to now say that with regards to... I've lost my train of thought. What were we talking about? Sorry, the relief phase. With the relief phase, what we normally see for avoidant attachers when they've immediately broken up with someone is they do feel relief. It's like, oh, thank God, the issue's gone, problem solved, I don't have anxiety anymore. She was obviously the problem, it was the relationship's fault. That's what they feel, temporarily. Now that can last for sometimes a few days, weeks, months, maybe even a few years. But then all of that fondness for you, the guilt and shame of how they broke up with you abruptly, starts to hit them like a freight train, and they feel really shitty. But you obviously didn't get that side of it. You got probably the part of it where he's feeling euphoric. Hooray, the problem is over. I'm done now and everything's okay. I'm all good and, I'm in the best place of my life. Do you know, that's a pretty awful thing to say to someone off the back of what you've been through. It's like, hang on a minute, bro, you just verbally abused me after I complimented a goddamn selfie. And you seemed like you were in control of your stuff, and now you're behaving like a lunatic and then acting like you're in the best place ever. I could imagine, Susan, for you may have been made to feel like, what the hell just happened here? Like, was I the problem? Did I do something to cause you to feel this way? That's a pretty awful experience to go through. I can see someone here says, well, everyone with attachment issues deserves empathy, but however, it doesn't excuse the actions of both anxious and avoidance, in my opinion. I feel like you're being too kind. I ain't got no clemency for people who, are continuing to act like this. Yeah, sure. As an edutainer, this is me talking. If you're my client, different story. That's where I'm like, obviously, I'll hear you out and try and work through it. But this shit, I'm sorry, I don't care what attachment issues you have. This shit, I don't give a fuck about, because frankly, this is just not okay for anyone to go through on any case. So anyways, I can see someone here says, what if an avoidant became an attached? The universe would explode. That's what would happen. All right, let's continue. Susan says he has self-image issues. Yeah, I'm not surprised. And in the latest email said that although I was good to him, there were a few times he felt disrespected by me. I do not know the details of these times, as he has not said nor brought them up at the time when we were going through our own fights. And I thought they'd been resolved, but apparently not. I have left it alone since, but I am so deep in grief and my therapy feels like it's hindering more than helping. We'll talk about that in just a hot second, Susan. Some days I feel okay, others I'm a crying mess. I still function because I have to. But I guess now I'm just waiting for the day he reaches out. And I know for a fact, because Susan shared with me, he did reach out, hoping he'll explain what the hell happened and that the nasty things he said were not true. Just that he was scared and freaked out about the meeting. Either way, my heart wants him back so badly, but my head says it doesn't matter what the excuse is. This isn't something I should go back to. Another point we'll turn to. I know I have to go through this pain and process it, but I am so scared that when he comes back, if he comes back, I won't be able to resist. I am over the dopamine addiction of hearing my phone go off with a message from him now, which was torture. Yeah, that is torture. But I have just so much compassion for the hurt little boy inside him, and I'm utterly broken and so sad for both of us. I love this man, and I truly believe he loves me. I don't view him as perfect, no one is, but I love him anyway. Help, Ken. All right, I'll do my best. All right, Susan, what you've touched on at the end is really, really, really beautiful and also very understanding. Now, a little second ago, I said I don't have any clemency for this dude, but just hear me out for 1 second. Put that to one side. I understand that anyone who has been in a similar situation, fresh off the heels of a breakup with someone who likely has an avoidant attachment style, would understand that feeling of like, I feel sorry for this guy. I feel that, I really feel, tremendous, sadness for this guy because I can understand how much he's hurting. I think one of the reasons why these dynamics are kryptonite and also catnip for a lot of us anxious attachers is a lot of us have actually experienced significant emotional neglect. We know what it feels like to grow up lonely at times and not really connected with other people around us. And even though we may not recognize that internally, we're very good at picking that up intuitively in other people. And a lot of the people who often have that very similar resonance to us are avoidant attachers. Sure, they may look pristine and hyper independent on the outside, but we can often pick up there's something a lot more sad in a lot of these avoidant attachers, something very tender and something very sensitive about these people that becomes very, very addictive for a lot of us because we want to support and help them. I'm not here to judge that and say, codependency land, love addiction. Yeah, shit, Sherlock, we know that. So put that to one side for a minute and just say, I understand why a lot of people, including myself formerly, have a lot of love for the avoidant attachers in our lives, even when they pull this crap on us. So I can understand at the time at which you wrote that, Susan, that your heart may have been like, I am just not over this at all. And I feel like, even though, yes, he's done all this terrible stuff to me, thankfully I'm no longer, waiting to hear a text message from him. I still have a lot of love for him. So I do want to say, totally get it, respect it. And I know that you're not the first, you won't be the last to go through an experience like that. Now, putting that to one side, I would like to also talk about therapeutic intervention, where it can be good, where it can be crap. And I want to say, I want to just make it clear that a lot of clinicians will probably see these kind of breakups in their office, but may not always know how to best help their clients. I don't know what you went through, Susan, with your therapist. It's not to say that they're doing the wrong thing. They could actually be very well intentioned at the very least, but may not necessarily understand the nuances and complexities of this situation. And who knows, maybe there's certain things for you to think about for the future that you need to think about for how you approach therapy. But putting all those assumptions and speculation aside, here's what I will say in my experience has worked and what hasn't worked. Starting with what hasn't. If a therapist, whoever, is trying to jump the gun and be like, well, you clearly have issues with an emotionally unavailable background yourself. You're clearly attracted to this sort of stuff. I don't recommend as a clinician to jump into family of origin sort of stuff off the back of this. That is not the issue immediately. We'll get to that. And I know there's plenty of people online who love to go, well, the issue really isn't the avoidant. It's actually your past. We know that. We get it. But let's not lead the cart before the horse. We need to go away from that sort of stuff. As for, I can see someone here's written, other therapists were just like, tell me how you feel. Well, how about, I feel like I'm going to kill myself because of how much pain I'm in off the back of all this grief. And I know some therapists will freak out over that and go, let's write up suicide plans and notes for you too. It's like, whoa. I'm not going to act on it. I'm just feeling this way. And I also know that there can be presenting symptoms of like a racing heart, lots of anxiety, lots of this sort of stuff. So it is pretty intense when you're presenting these symptoms. And the average clinician who probably doesn't get these issues is probably going to think there's something wrong with you that you're having this big reaction. That is quite invalidating if I'm completely honest. So I want to make it very clear that whilst there can be some extreme cases of these, of clients who come in around these issues that do need a much more sophisticated step, here's what I found works. You just need to hear the person out, the client out with what they're going through. Listen to what they're saying, hear what they're going through, and above all else, if you've got the skill set and you understand it from an attachment perspective, psychoeducate the fuck out of your client and let them know what you're experiencing is real. what you're talking about is consistent with this attachment style. What you are experiencing may have something to do with some inner wounds that you're experiencing that may have been exacerbated, but we can address that issue when the time comes to it. However, when you are experiencing a lot of this stuff where you're feeling confused, all of this is very normal as part and course of this experience. Honestly, good old talk therapy actually can work wonders in this case, along with psychoeducation and a lot of validation. And then eventually you can get to a stage where if the client keeps saying, well, I worry that I wasn't good enough for that person, you can then maybe shift more into what I do, which is inner critic work, where I'm like, hold up a minute. Let's talk about that belief. Why do you feel like you weren't good enough for this? You know, do you have that recurring thought? Are you criticizing yourself over and over and over again? Someone here has asked, are you AI? How do you keep going? This is so impressive. The answer is yes, I'm actually artificially intelligent. I came to this planet because, frankly, being a human being sucked, and I thought it would be far better to fuck around and find out by just acting, artificial for everyone too. And I feel like I'm doing a much better job than people who act like robots. So yes, that's your answer. Anyways, with regards to working on inner critic stuff, I find that a lot of individuals really do end up getting into their own head and struggle with a lot of recurring thoughts around, was I good enough? What if I did this differently? I feel like I'm a bad person, and taking way too much accountability. That's where inner critic work can be really practical to help them overcome a lot of that internalized crap that they're feeling about themselves and hopefully shift it a bit so they're not taking so much accountability. Frankly, in most of these particular cases, it's not your fault. It's the person with like the avoidant attachment style. And also, I do not jump the gun. I know the person who made that AI comment, I know it was a compliment. I took it as one too. I was just fucking with you because I knew I could. I'm very cheeky like that when I can. So thank you very much. I appreciate it. I know that a lot of clinicians and influencers love to jump the gun and say, well, if you dated an avoidant, therefore you're anxiously attached. Not so. I saw someone earlier who said, I'm an avoidant and dated someone with a greater avoidance side, and it brought out the anxious attachment in me. Hell yeah. And that's why I'm very careful not to jump it immediately and be like, you must be anxiously attached to have gone through this, because that's simply not the case. And even people who are relatively secure-ish may still have some core wounds that are playing out in these moments where they can act a little bit insecure as well too. So that's where I think it's really important to actually know that. I also saw someone here say that one of their therapists was excusing the behavior of the avoidant attacher, where I'm assuming the avoidant behaved pretty badly. And you don't need that. Like, the last thing you need is devil's advocacy, someone being like, oh, but if you thought about what they're going through, who fucking cares? You're in a lot of grief. No one gives a shit about what they're going through at that point in time. It's not to say that their side of the story doesn't matter for their own therapist, but for you, frankly, they should have done a better job of explaining themselves to you ages ago, but they opted for rationalizations and to succumb to their fears. I know it's easier said than done to work through a lot of that stuff when an avoidant attacher is triggered. However, when a client is working with a clinician, we don't really need to be playing devil's advocacy all of the time across every situation, because frankly, a lot of the clients I work with are taking 99.9% accountability for what's going on in this situation. And it's time to be like, can you not do that? Because it's not really this is not actually a lot of your fault. You do need to learn. You obviously it'd be great if you can learn about attachment theory, learn what not to do next time, how to also pick this sort of stuff out, work on core wounds. That's your homework for the next 5+ years. But working on, trying to understand and explain what their behavior was and why they did this to you can actually be really damaging and triggering for a lot of you, where you don't need to feel like you're more responsible for something that is not entirely your responsibility. So that's why I'm very particular about the fact that, yes, in situations like this, it may seem like I'm very, very, I own this, on the side of the person who was dumped or had to dump their avoidant partner, because in most of these cases, that's just how it goes. So, that's how it is. I can see someone here who said, what if you legitimately are equally accountable? Well, then it would certainly show differently in the display of what happened, wouldn't it? And that's not to say that can't happen. Absolutely. Look, legit accountability happens a lot of the cases. Sometimes I'll hear stories where I'm like, okay, clearly you did a bit of this, that person did a bit of that. Can we work on this, please? But in these trauma bonded relationships, I find they're much more lopsided and the accountability piece tends to be skewed, where the person who's on the receiving end of this bad behavior is copying so much crap for the other person's dysfunctional behavior. So that's why I'm like, you gotta be careful with a lot of this stuff. So yeah, that's the therapy piece in a nutshell. But I just want to quickly review Susan's letter before rounding out and doing my little piece on emotional unavailability. I realize I spent a lot of time going through this today, but I don't mind, and I don't think anyone else minds as well too. Last thing. You mentioned, I worry that if he were to come back to me, I wouldn't know how to handle it. Valid. I know a lot of people who probably wouldn't. Look, when I went through this, I have to be honest, there were about a good 6 months post-breakup where I still wanted to give it another go. I often tell my clients, listen, if you're in a position where you still feel like you want to give this another go, you're welcome to try on the basis that, you do it sensibly. And I often don't recommend clients do that until they've actually gotten to a place of feeling more grounded, had some time and distance from their partner, and they're not in that love addicty sort of cycle of like, how can I get my ex back again? Going to all the YouTubers and influencers trying to practice the no contact rule to try and work on it. I'm like, no, like let's not do it for those reasons. Like, if you're going to do this, just like get regulated, get grounded, look at this a little bit differently. I don't think there's anything wrong with a reconciliatory chat. I can tell you now that most of the time it won't be reconciliatory. Because at the end of the day, I think a lot of you feel like your voice was taken away, you were controlled, and you also felt as though, you weren't able to actually have a voice in this experience because most of these experiences are unilaterally ended. And you often feel like you're basically denied a chance to actually speak up for yourself. So that's why I want to just make it very clear that, a lot of you in the rage and anger phase of the healing process, you'll have a big emotional shift in the future where you'll eventually be like, fuck that. I did not deserve to be treated this way. I did not deserve to have this experience happen to me. I deserve to be treated better than this. And that's really good. Like, honestly, the anger phase is my favorite phase of this experience because often, even though pretty much everyone I know entertains some pretty dark thoughts where they might be, wishing they could throw their ex down the stairs, off a cliff, blowing them up, shooting them. And by the way, this is not me advising you actually do any of that because that will land you in jail. I am not saying do that. Please, for the love of God, do not do that shit. I am simply saying that you will probably definitely entertain some pretty dark thoughts off the back of this. And it's very normal for a lot of people to feel a bit of shame that they're actually experiencing so much anger. But here's the thing. There ain't no justice for anyone who goes through this except coming here and sending me your letter. There ain't no, experience where the dating police will come by and take your avoidant ex, plonk them into attachment therapy and be like, you are here now for the next 5 years of your life. Hope you enjoy. We don't get that. A lot of us are emotionally abused off the back of these experiences, psychologically scarred, and have to pick ourselves up off the floor. And we really do feel like when we get the rage phase, we're literally singing Good For You by Olivia Rodrigo. And one of the best things that can come out of this is learning your standards and boundaries to never, ever let this happen to you again. A lot of people probably will go through a variation of this again, but I can assure you, having seen a lot of people who have risen above and beyond a lot of these experiences, that you will get better over time at having a smaller tolerance for bullshit and a greater perception of energy and what's not in alignment for you. So in that sense, all of this will eventually help you in the long run, but I want to make it very, very, very clear that it is very normal to have a real flip-flop of emotions of desiring and hating this person tremendously for what you've been through. And at the end of this experience, you probably look at it and go, I don't really care if this person has any attachment issues for that matter. I didn't deserve to have this experience happen to me. And if you still want to try and reach out to your avoidant ex to just even tell them, I just didn't like the way I was treated, but I wish you all the best. It can often be great just to get that off your chest. So I'm just saying, you can do it, but, that's how I'd say. All right, I'm going to round out Susan's letter here and just say, Susan, thank you for, giving me, this letter. I know obviously this is not a work of fiction, but, and I almost wish these were a work of fiction so that they weren't actually telling the story of people who've gone through significant emotional abuse off the back of these experiences. So I want to make it very clear that, as much as I love reading these letters, I'm very aware of just how emotionally abused and scarred people are off the back of it. So thank you again. I hope this was validating. And I will be putting out this and also other episodes back on Spotify and YouTube. But I always enjoy coming here to talk on, on lives as well too. So, I just decided to drop in to do a reading of a letter, and then it will go to Spotify and YouTube as well too. All right. Let's talk about emotional unavailability. So for those of you that want to stick around for this part, feel free to, that's totally fine. But I want to make it very clear that this is a bit of a TED Talky sort of conversation. Then we'll run into Q&A. All right. The reason I wanted to talk about emotional unavailability is because one of my followers said to me, when we're talking about emotionally unavailable guys, girls, people, are we really just referring to avoidance? And my answer was kind of, but not really. Meaning that the way I look at emotional unavailability is that it's a term used to describe people who are not connecting with their own emotions, expressing their own emotions, and are also afraid to speak up for themselves out of fear of abandonment. It's when someone is not able to open their heart to true love, and they're also not able to effectively communicate on behalf of a lot of the insecurities they might feel. So the reason I'm describing it like this is because though traditionally, classically, a lot of dating coaches, literature, and even, mental health professionals refer to emotionally unavailable people who are classically avoidantly attached, we also need to consider the ways in which people who date avoidant attachers may be being emotionally unavailable to themselves. So let's start with avoidant attachers and emotional unavailability. To be honest, if we were looking and talking about the stereotypically emotionally unavailable person, we're really just talking about people with a severe avoidant attachment style. We are talking about the fuckboys, the manic pixie dream girls, the people who are very, very, they're people who are appearing to want to have a relationship or go with the flow in reverse, who are not going to commit with you. The people who will tell you after 3 months of dating that we're just friends. Even though that category has been used to describe people who are emotionally unavailable, it's actually talking, in my experience, about people who have an avoidant attachment style. So that's why I think people have tried talking about a lot of that. And it's really interesting online when you see, people across all communities, straight, LGBTQI+, talking about the same issues. And it's like, you're just talking about attachment issues. And it's interesting seeing how people try and then to make it seem like, the solution to this problem is if you're a woman dating a guy, don't tell them your emotions. Just don't be needy, be demure, be mindful. Those words just came to me from the meme. I don't know why. But basically, be the cool girl. Be the girl who's high value. Be the girl who is demanding all the guys' attention. And this very, frankly, toxic advice, I think has positioned women who are particularly vulnerable to emotionally unavailable, avoidantly attached men to continue seeking that out, thinking that they have somehow the solution to the problem by trying to chase people who will never give them love in the first place. And men have also gotten a bit of a twist of that experience in straight relationships as well too, where it's all about being alpha, being emotionless, or in some dysfunctional cases too, being the nice guy, give her everything, pay for everything. And they wonder why then, due to their lack of financial boundaries, they feel used by people too. To which I say, at that point, that's on you, bro. But out of compassion, I do think we as a society don't appreciate the severity, the lack of education, and also how these attachment issues play in the landscape of dating, where we talk about, emotional unavailability as if it's just like, oh, they're an emotionally unavailable guy, girl or person, and it's okay. It's like, no. If you've dated someone who at the very least is emotionally unavailable as an avoidant attacher, that shit can fucking scar you for life. And we shouldn't be denouncing it as if it's just like, oh, he's just that mama's boy who I knocked back to the curb. It's like, well, hang on a minute. Why are we engaging with this? Why are we romanticizing dating the bad guys or the cool girls? Why are we creating a culture of trying to make this work when it's like, it's never going to work unless these people start going to therapy and working on themselves too. So that's why I get really bothered when the language of emotional unavailability is almost sometimes used quite flippantly without really understanding a lot of the underlying mechanisms for why it works. It's similar to when dating coaches like Matthew Hussey, who I have got an ongoing record of not really loving his advice and his stuff, talk about this as if to say like, it's so easy, just be high value for a high value partner. And it's like, no, bro, there's a lot more sophisticated nuances and stuff going on here too. So that's the avoidant attachment side of the street. And I can see someone here's written Peter Pan syndrome. Yes. Arrested development, emotional immaturity go hand in hand with emotional unavailability. When you are acting like a teenager emotionally and just thinking you can have your cake and eating it too, not a great place to be in the world of dating. I also want to state that, there was something I was going to say that was important. It'll come back to me. I wanted to shift the conversation now to the emotional unavailability of people who are anxiously attached, because this is where the spotlight can be triggering, uncomfortable for a lot of us. So before I continue, trigger warning. If what I'm about to say is something which can be, uncomfortable for a lot of you who may or may not be engaging in therapy, you're welcome to opt out now, because I appreciate this may not be something you are ready or want to necessarily discuss. So for those of you that want to opt out, feel free to do so now. For those of you that are here to stay, fantastic. I did a video on this ages ago. It was a big live where I was basically saying, for those of us that are anxiously attached, we can be very, 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 very attracted to emotionally unavailable, avoidantly attached people. Why? Because it satisfies a lot of things. While the avoidant may lust for escapism to avoid their pain, we lust for the avoidant attacher in the hope that they will resolve our pain, which they won't. It's very easy for us to get all of this great feedback and kindness and attention from people who are secure for the most part. Kind, loving people, and be like, oh, that's not challenging enough. I want to go for the person who actually feels like a challenge. I want to feel like I've earned it. I want to feel like, I'm able to have someone who meets my worth. And there is danger in that, because the minute we start thinking that we have, we treat this like an exercise of proving ourselves, then we're not really being very loving, and we think that there's somehow a degree of control we have in being able to turn these unavailable people into liking us. And it's why it also hurts so much when these experiences fail, because we often have huge ego collapse. We often feel like, oh, god damn, I feel like I'm a failure because this didn't work out. And I have to call every guy out lovingly, because I myself was here, but I got to tell you all, you guys, including myself formerly, take this way harder than women sometimes, where you feel like you are an absolute failure, that you got egg on your face because you weren't able to make the person you were dating, want you back. And I'm here to tell you that was a race you were never going to win. So please understand, regardless of, your sexuality, that with regards to a lot of this sort of stuff, be very mindful of if you find yourself chasing and trying to prove yourself for another person. As for a lot of the other stuff that goes on for anxious attachers, I mentioned earlier in Susan's letter how something that we often do as anxious attachers is neglect a lot of our emotional stuff, and we can readily pick it up in people who are emotionally unavailable or have problems. Hence why, in narcissistic abuse recovery circles, the empath and the narcissist are two sides of the same coin, where that has been a tale as old as time. But then secondly, we've had the other story of the anxious and avoidant trap, where I find a lot of anxious attachers who lean a little bit too heavily in the realm of codependency, maybe a bit in the realm of love addiction territory, can feel the pain and also the loneliness of the avoidant attacher that may be an inner reflection of unresolved pain that they feel inside of themselves and feel like they can fix it in their partner, that they can connect with their partner. I think part of the reason why being with an avoidant attacher, particularly in those honeymoon phases of the situationships and relationships, are so intoxicating and also ultimately quite tragic in the end, is because when you take a step back from it, you often feel accepted, you felt loved by this person, and you feel understood. Many of us who are anxiously attached have had a history of emotional neglect. Even if the roof was over our head, we had food on the table, we had all the comforts of a foundational family environment, we may have also not had emotional attunement. We may not have had parents who could really connect with how we're feeling. And in some cultures, feelings are banned. Not literally, but it's taboo to sometimes bring up your feelings because it's like, why would we want to talk about that? So, as a consequence, a lot of us misunderstood anxious attachers often feel like, oh, well, you're also misunderstood. Part of the unavailability trap that a lot of us fall into when we're dating avoidant attachers is we often feel quite a lot of familiarity with the avoidant that we're dating. Similar background, we really understand each other, and so it can feel like we've met our twin flame. What a surprise, because of those shared experiences that have happened as well too. So part of the learning to heal our unavailability to true, well, I don't want to say true love because I don't want to invalidate anyone for thinking this was true love because it can feel like true love. Let me put it this way. Part of our healing to feel more mature and also secure love is to recognize we actually need to get some validation for ourselves from people who also can, do that reparenting work with us, ideally a therapist or a counselor or a psychologist or psychiatrist who can help us out. And we also really need to, and I'm just going to say this politely, we need to be bloody good at picking up on our bullshit detector, people who are still not working on their stuff. We cannot play therapist for other people. And it's true for the avoidant attachers because they can do that too for the people that they often interact with as well. For all of us insecure attachers, it is a great sign of unavailability when you are chasing and trying to facilitate a relationship with someone who is mired in their dysfunctionality. If you are trying to rescue them from that, you are in a trauma bond. That is not healthy. It is not good for you. Sure, there may be love in that, but lest we forget that love and other dysfunctional stuff can coexist. So please bear in mind that if you're in a situation where you're like, oh, I need to make my partner feel safe, I want you gently encouraging you to flip the script and go, I actually need my partner to make me feel safe. For those of us that are more anxiously attached, frankly, we need to flip the script and stop saying, what can I do for you? Instead be like, what can I do for me? I don't give a fuck about what's going on for the other person. I know that sounds harsh. I know that sounds narcissistic, but I got to tell you, we actually do need to develop much more healthier narcissism. And I know it seems extreme, but I can assure you that even when you think you've become your most selfish, narcissistic version of yourself, you will still never be as narcissistic as the people who are true narcs. And for those that are more avoidantly attached, they need to go in the complete other direction and become way more giving, loving, and inclusive of the people that are around them as well too. So they need to go in the complete other direction and be much more in that position of what can I do for you and how can I involve you in my thinking and feeling. So that's why it's really important in the recovery of both attachment groups, and by both I mean anxious and the avoidant umbrella of fearful and also dismissive avoidance, to learn to work on their wounding in order to actually go the other direction and be more balanced as human beings. Easier said than done. And even though when I say things like, we need to actually develop more healthy narcissism, I see someone here says, love yourself first. I want to make it clear that loving ourselves is not something that is easy for a lot of us. Doing self-care, frankly, can be much more tricky than most of us would think. It's not just listening to the bubble bath brigade and making sure that we're just putting our bath bombs in on time. It's actually doing some very important steps. Proper nutrition, making sure we're going to the doctors to make sure we're taking care of our health, scheduling time to do nothing and to actually spend intentional time for ourselves, making that time to actually work on ourselves intentionally, ideally with a journal or some other form of emotional regulation. It's hard at times for a lot of us to sit with ourselves and work through this. I can see someone here says, anxious and avoidant couple, should they work together? The devil is in the detail. If both people are working on it, fantastic, amazing, hope it works out. But I want to make it very clear. My opinion of the anxious avoidant dynamic is not an optimistic one. I think, and this is, you can quote me on this, I think we've romanticized the anxious and avoidant dynamic, and it's actually very unhealthy for a lot of us. I think that even though there are great components in this, marvelous for self-reflection, we can take a lot of stuff from us, I wanted to say that far often in my experience, and granted I work in the lopsided department of relationships, so I admit I'm biased, but take my biased opinion with this, I think this is completely a waste of a lot of our time. I actually think it's perfect for self-growth and development, but when you've had enough of having gluten, I suggest you try gluten-free. There is a time and a place for going through these experiences to improve our self-worth and also to realize what we should and shouldn't be interacting with. But I'm going to tell you now that I actually think the anxious avoidant dynamic is a hard no from me personally when it comes to these relationships. I need someone, and I'm speaking for myself here, who's working on themselves, taking accountability, and is actually being quite considerate. So that's why I'm saying, even though there's lots of books out there who love to romanticize how to make these work, I just think it's enabling trauma bonds, codependency, and a whole lot of stuff that's just not healthy. But that's my general opinion. I want to make it clear as a reminder. This is me as an edutainer speaking, not what I be navigating individually with certain clients depending on what they're going through, because obviously every case is very different. But I appreciate that some people may be trying to work on this for themselves, and that's okay. Because like I said, if two people can work on this together, I see no reason as to why this can't work out. So I think that's my general attitude on this. All right, let's go to Q&A, and then I'm going to bounce. So I can see someone here says, so what do I do? Presumably if you're in an anxious avoidant trap, do I just leave? But they think everyone leaves, so what should be done? Oh, you're probably dating a fearful avoidant. And I say that because that is a classic line. They think that everyone leaves, suggests to me that that person has at least a degree of anxious attachment, or is a fearful avoidant, only on the basis that if they've said that, and I'm leaning fearful avoidant on the basis that it is very common to have a core belief as a fearful avoidant. Part of your betrayal wound is everyone will leave me. I hate to break it to a lot of people like yourself in this situation, but without knowing your situation, here's the thing. You cannot rescue them from their coping mechanisms and their behavior that push people away. They need to recognize that they facilitate and they cause this. And if you, unfortunately, are another chalk cross on the chalkboard of, failed relationships, maybe they need to learn that for themselves. Now, out of compassion and empathy, I want to just say, I am sorry you might be in this situation. I don't know what the specifics are that you're working on this. I don't know what you're going through specifically with your partner. I really can't offer advice as to what to do and how you should navigate this. But I want to just leave it by saying you can't pacify someone's fear of being abandoned. They need to work on that for themselves. And you also need to try and have chats and involve yourself with them. But if, for instance, they're behaving badly, like, for example, if they're being hot and cold with you, and then they also tell you, people always leave me, that's on them. Their behavior is eliciting people to go. That ain't on you at this particular point in time. That's where it's really important to take a step back and look at the bigger picture of all of this stuff. But I want to say, you sound like a very compassionate and also empathic person, and I really respect that about you because I think that's really good. All right, I can see here someone's asked, what is the percentage of avoidance that can heal from their attachment style according to your experience? I have to be honest, I'm a very biased source because I deal with the extreme cases, and the extreme cases terrify me. And if we're talking about the extreme cases, I don't think the answer is going to be very high. So I don't like giving percentages, but at this time, Based on what I know with my work, I would say it's minimal. I'm not going to put a number on it, but I would say the extreme cases, oh God, they'd have to have their come to Jesus moment, and it has to be really hard. And you've got to remember too, some of these people have survived pretty bad rock bottoms and just pick themselves up and just get back onto it until another even more significant rock bottom happens. And they don't take time to just sit with the stuff that's happening to them. So if they're the kind of people that just keep walking out of their holes and finding, coping strategies to not deal with the aftermath of it, they may never get better. But in terms of the broader avoidant attachment population, there is plenty of hope. We have, Stephen Carter and Julia Sokol, who wrote the book series, including Men Who Can't Love, He's Scared, She's Scared, who appear to be people who are recovering avoidant attachers. We know Neil Strauss, who sounds like he was definitely on the extreme end as a severe, sex addict. Seemed like he's gone through a bit of a recovery journey. But here's the thing, we don't also have access to a lot of longitudinal studies. The accounts here by avoidant attachers that proclaim their healing, we don't know what that healing looks like and what it means. To one avoidant attacher, healing means bitching about anxious attachers and complaining how they're the devil and that they make them feel like they need to shut down all the time. But to the perspective of someone who's actually gone through a lot of healing work, it might sound much more like, I can see the ways in which I behaved out of my avoidant attachment style and pushed good people away because I was scared to commit. And I can see that I had these big wounds where I didn't love myself. And I'm actually really working on a lot of this stuff. And I want to involve future partners with what's going on. Very different dispositions from both kind of individuals. And I also want to take a moment here to say that anxious attachers are not getting off the hook on that one. I've seen a lot of anxious attachers go around bleating about how avoidants are the devil. And I want to make it very clear that I've had some people come to me being like, stop making excuses for avoidance. I'm like, who do you think you're talking to? I haven't made excuses for these people. Like, what are you saying? And it's in those moments where I'm like, I think you're abdicating your own involvement with the fact that you chose this person. Like, you also were part of this experience. And I think you need to also acknowledge the fact that you actually played a role in this. So when I hear anxious attachers, not in the healthy rage phase, but the more like Reddit keyboard warrior phase, which is not really a healing phase in my opinion, I'm like, now you're acting like what I call an externalizer. You're just blaming without wanting to sit with the shame and embarrassment and and all the other emotions of what happened. So when I hear that from certain anxious attachers, I'm like, you kind of just, it's actually really not lovely energy at all. Like that's not what I would define as healed. So yeah, that's what I would say there. So to answer the original question, how many avoidant attachers do I think will change? The answer is, I think it depends on their capacity, their bandwidth, and also their willingness to work on themselves and to see how much they can go inside of themselves. And it is very case by case. I'm sorry I can't give you a fixed number. Someone asked me, do I still accept letters for the Ken Read segment? Not yet. Soon, but not yet. I'm still working through the September batch and August. And when I go to reopen the next round of Ken Reads in October, I'm raising the rates and I'm only accepting 12 per month because on this occasion, I think I got close to 30 letters all at once, which, by the way, loved all the letters, but your boy also needs time off from work. And I also need to make sure that I'm living my life. Otherwise, between my assistant and I, we're pumping out letters all the time and it just kind of gets a little bit too much. I can see someone here's asked, what's that Olivia Rodrigo song you referenced? It Was Good For You. Frankly, if you listen to her entire album, which I think is Guts, like every song in that is literally the avoidant breakup cycle. Start with like driver's license, then go to Trader, then go to Deja Vu, then go to Good For You. And you'll be like, yep, I see my journey through this experience. There is something particularly resonant for me when, Olivia Rodrigo is, singing lines like, about how her ex was dating a girl who looked and acted very similar to her, because that's a very avoidant thing. And then in Good For You is saying lines like, I lost my mind crying on the floor of my bathroom. That, I didn't quite get that far to be crying on my bathroom floor, but I know people who have, because I think you have to have gone through this experience to know what it's like to feel like your brain just split in two off the back of an experience like this because it really, really fucks with your head. So that's why I'm a big fan of it. All right, I'm going to speed run some of these questions, so let's keep going. My fearful avoidant ex is in a rebound. She is my complete opposite. She is clearly not his type. Why do they do this? Great question. And I've answered this a few times, but I'm happy to answer it again because it's a very common situation. They get with the rebound. Sorry, they get back with... Let me start that again. They get with someone even if it's not their type because it's someone they don't have to feel emotionally connected with. It's someone who's emotionally safe. They're not going to feel triggered by fear of intimacy and commitment with this person, which ironically means they're probably more likely to commit to this person because they're not triggered and activated. And even though when this happens, you can feel really shitty about yourself because it can make you feel like, were they lying? Was I just not good enough for them? It feels really gross that they got with the person they said they'd never want to be with, but that's their comfort zone. It's actually not about you. Yes, it feels shitty. I'm not taking that away from you. That's what they're used to subconsciously, being with someone who doesn't trigger them. And you got to remember too, avoidant attachers are also at times in a very toxic perfectionistic mindset. Dating someone who is their type, they can freak out, think they're going to make a mistake. They're worried that it's all going to end badly for them. So you being the type could really, really trigger them as well too, because it's like, this is too good. What if I fail? What if this person doesn't want to be with me? It's just another influencing factor as to why they break away from you and they might choose someone who's not their type at all. Happened to me, and I can assure you that when it happened, I actually had a very weird reaction where I was like, why did you pick that? Like, I mean, no offense to the person they chose, but I also knew them and I was like, that person has not the best social skills and you said you like me for my social skills, so bit of a strange way to go around from me to the next person, so not great idea if I were you, but anyways, your choice. My DAX took the time to dislike all the photos on my social media, but he is still following me and wished me my birthday 6-month post-breakup. I don't understand his ambivalent behavior. He's trying to maintain access to you, but is not wanting to go any further than that. As for the time of disliking all the photos on social media, what a petty thing to do. I suspect that he was probably, taking out a lot of his shame onto you by doing that. But it still sounds to me like even in spite of that pettiness, he's still actually got, a degree of connectivity that he's feeling for you. But I want to make it very clear. 2 things. Does not mean he wants to get back with you and he will actualize that. But I also want to state that, this is where avoidant attachers are consistently inconsistent. Their emotions drive a lot of their behavior, and until they get some good regulation, this confusing behavior is what happens. I want to take a moment here to explain the concept of feelings as a information source for us as human beings. My opinion is that I love my feelings, the good, the bad, the not so great, the insecure, and all that stuff. Now, I have got to be honest and say, when I've made decisions from an emotional place, it's had mixed results. Even decisions made from a place of excitement have not always led to the best results for me. And that's why I want to make it clear that even though we often look at bad emotions like anxiety or like depression, insecurity as being the basis for making poor decisions, I want to make it very clear that the more positive feeling emotions also have a basis for making not the wisest decisions in the long run. Secondly, I want to make it very clear that when it comes to feelings in general, for people who have a lot of dysregulation, complex post-traumatic stress disorder, they are very often at times impulsive. They lean into their feelings and make very impulsive decisions. So, for avoidant attachers, if they're feeling particularly anxious, they may choose to end a relationship because they feel like it's the right thing to do in the heat of the moment. They'll feel relief. Oh, because relief is always the sign of things being better, right? Not always. Then shortly after, they have their guilt and shame spiral and also start missing you. Here's the thing. My attitude with feelings is I think they're excellent sources of information to tell us what we're feeling, but I think it's always good in my experience to talk it out with a trusted source, the person you're feeling the feelings for or about, if it's safe and okay, and also to do a bit of self-validation before making a decision if you can. I know that ain't realistic for all occasions, but I think for big decisions, particularly breakups, I don't think it's always wise to just rely on our feelings all of the time if it's not necessarily lining up with what we've experienced in the past. I am not talking also about abusive relationships. I understand that's its whole different ball game. Like that's its own thing. Like we're talking like in the sort of the classic domestic violence, coercive control sort of stuff. I'm talking more in the realm of like if you have an insecure attachment, just be careful of when your emotional stuff starts to play havoc on your decision making and perceptions of judgment, because often I find particularly that once the emotional wave is over, I actually start discerning whether or not I'm actually making a more, let's just say, aligned decision with my values. A skill that's easier said than done, and I do recommend that everyone who is interested get some emotional regulation, because I know as a business owner, I have moments of euphoria where I feel like the fucking king of the world. I have moments of panic where I'm like, where's all the money going, even though I'm earning a lot? And I also have moments where I'll have like, you know, it's just one of those things where big feelings are a feature of the human experience. And it doesn't mean that they're necessarily wrong. It just means be mindful of whether or not they're over-attuned in certain situations. That's my 2 cents on that too. All right, let's keep going. I don't want my fearful avoidant ex back, nor do I recognize she's good for me. Good for you. Despite this, I still miss her and hope she's doing well. Is this normal, and how do I move past this? I don't know if you were there for Susan's letter reading, but that is absolutely normal and it's okay. It sounds to me like you got a little bit of battle between head and heart. Your head probably knows it's not good, but your heart probably still wants her. So here's the thing I want to just encourage you gently. Move your head to the side. We understand that she's probably not good for you, but take the time to listen to your heart and what your heart's feeling. Chances are you probably still feel a lot of love for this person, and you probably still miss her for all the good times you had. I would take the time to focus on that, not out of a place of judgment, but out of a place of compassion for you, the future you thought you were going to have with this person, and just stick around with that. Because I can assure you that eventually your heart will catch up to your head, but you really, really, really need to take time to sit in the shit with all those big feelings that you've got, because that's really where the work needs to be done. I find a lot of people try and force their heart to see the terrible part of this experience, but your heart's not there. You've got to be exactly at where your heart's at. Otherwise, it's not going to work out. All right, next question. Do dismissive avoidance and fearful avoidance gaslight or confabulate? What does that word mean? Great word from the sounds of it, but I've never, sorry, I'm just looking this up. Confabulate. Sorry guys, I hope you don't mind me just quickly looking this up, but I actually want to look this up. Engage in conversation talk. She could be heard on the telephone confabulating with someone. What is the meaning of confabulate? To talk informally, to hold a discussion, to fill in the gaps in memory. Oh, do you mean the part of to fill in the gaps in memory by fabrication? Right, okay. I'm assuming you mean that part. Do DAs and FAs gaslight or confabulate, or maybe both? Oh yeah, absolutely both. I've heard of plenty of avoidant attachers who've, using this new word, great word, confabulate. I can see someone's written here, fab in confabulate in capital letters to make it look like fabulous. That's great. Yeah, they absolutely can, because if the narrative causes them shame and they don't feel good about themselves, of course they're going to confabulate it. It's all about, you got to remember this, fearful avoidance and dismissive avoidance don't want to feel shame. But frankly, they don't want to feel their emotions. So if some of those emotions and also some of those hard truths that they know they're avoiding cause them to feel any of that discomfort, confabulation is a fantastic way of rewriting the script to make them feel better. Fantastic question. You've made me learn a new word today, so that was great. Okay, I can see someone here's written me a part 1 and a part 2. I know you said that second time round with an avoidant is faster and harder. My fearful avoidant hasn't said a word in 5 weeks now. Should I just let him go? Any advice? Am I getting slow faded out? I'm going to assume that you've been with this fearful avoidant now for a second round and they've not communicated with you as much and the communication has become more sparse over time? To my answer is probably. I know for me, when I experience a slow fade, the way I would describe it is that where once I would get messages every day, it came down to once a week and then once every 2 weeks. When the frequency is changing to such a degree where there's no communication explaining why this is happening, that is my definition of a slow fade. I don't know if that's like, consistent with your experience, but that's what I would say is definitely, going on there. I got a great job offer where my fearful avoidant ex works at. I'm torn between taking it versus not. It's a great career move for me. Oof. And you want me to give you my opinion on this? Okay, so I guess thank you for trusting me with that. First thing I would say is, ouch. Second thing I'd say is not an easy thing to figure out. If it were me, because I can't give you advice, I would say I'd really have to think about how accepting that job was going to affect my mental and emotional well-being. I would suss it out with the company. Like if I was going out with this company, I might be like, look, I really love the sound of this offer. I have to be honest and say, I actually have had history with a previous coworker, and I obviously don't mean to have any altercation with her and affect the culture at this particular company. I really love this job. Is there a way that we can make this work where perhaps there's some boundaries between my engagement with this particular person so that way we're not really connecting that much? Is that possible? I don't think, realistically, I don't think that's unreasonable because, a lot of companies will see, intimacy, relationships, breakups happen quite frequently. And I think actually if they have a decent HR department and can see if there's ways to work through it, that's a great company in my opinion. See how you go in terms of negotiating it. Hopefully the company also gives you 2 months before signing on as a full-time employee. So I think that if I were you, I'd suss out what you can get away with at this particular company and see if you can do it in such a way where it's not going to affect your mental and emotional well-being, and give it 2 months as a trial if they offer probation. And if you find that you can't, it just is too hard for you, at least you know your answer. And it doesn't mean that opportunity won't come back to you in time or a better one won't come to you. Maybe you actually need to go through this period to see if this is something that you can do. So that's my 2 cents to you in that situation. But I think that what I'd say to you is it's something that I think you should sit with and think about. And it is a very hard question to answer for you in that particular situation. Can I just say, I love the fact that the chat are having their own therapy conversation amongst each other. This is great. I feel like I don't have to do anything. So thank you to the chat for just casually chatting amongst yourselves and, working through a lot of stuff. It's great. Can I also just say, I don't say this enough, but I really appreciate and adore this community that's been created because, it's rare that I see a community getting along this well with one another, where they're so supportive and empathetic, and they're not getting well, what did you do to cause the avoidant to behave like this? Yes, we know they deactivated and they had their moment. Thanks, got that. But I think that, when it comes to working through this sort of stuff, empathy goes a long way, community too, and I'm very grateful that this has been such a supportive space for a lot of you too. So thank you all for being warm, accepting, and above all else, validating, because I think that goes miles in this experience. Someone who said clearly only the anxious in the building. Nah, there's plenty of avoidance here too. I've had a lot of avoidant attachers come to me where they've come off the back of this being like, fuck, I didn't realize how avoidant I was until I met someone who was more avoidant than me. In fact, I actually know someone who sounds like they're doing a great job as a coach, who's a recovering fearful avoidant. And he was saying that the content helped him with a bad experience he had with a fearful avoidant ex of his. So that's why I just want to say that, again, I am very careful to throw generalizations of saying it's clearly only the anxious who go through this experience, because it's fucking not. It's, we're all struggling through this. Some of us will, go through degrees of change more effectively than others. But, to each our own as we work through this. All right, 2 more questions and then I'm out of here. So Someone's asked, do you think an avoidant is ironically a safer place to land after a narcissist? As in, do I think that if you've been with a narcissist, being with an avoidant is safer? In the early stages, sure, because you'll be like, oh, this is what love is supposed to feel like. And then eventually you'll go through the avoidant breakup and it will destroy you. So I'd say, I'd say in that context, I'd say, enjoy it for while it lasts, but be aware of the expiration date the minute you guys get attached. But in saying that, I also want to flip the question and say many avoidants do get with narcissists because it feels subconsciously safer than being with an intimate partner. So that is very much a thing too. All right. Last question. Is there a link between an avoidant leaving you abruptly, hurting you, pushing you away, harshly refusing to communicate or give closure, with them then committing immediately to God, I feel like I was answering this question. With them committing immediately to a narcissist and acting as if you never existed? Absolutely yes. So I must be psychic. Or just artificially intelligent. But no, in all seriousness though, that is very much a thing. So like I was saying to answer before with the previous question, so a lot of individuals with avoidant attachment, often particularly fearful avoidance, may have very likely come from a very dysfunctional background. Had a narcissistic mum, dad with BPD, bipolar. It's very common for chaos, enmeshment, abuse, neglect to be the theme of people with an avoidant attachment style. So that's what they're used to. And they also have learned to mold themselves for these people. And part of the human crises is that often we're still looking for approval and validation from these people. And until we work on that, that becomes a bit of a recurring theme for our lives, in that we're still chasing that approval and acceptance from those who hurt us. And that will still take on the form of other people as well too. So absolutely, to round this question out, it is very, very likely for a lot of avoidant attachers to go to someone who is abusive because deep down it's safer. They're looking to try and turn the impossible and make it possible. And I truly, truly do think that, a lot of them, find degrees of comfortability with the fact that it's like, oh, well, I know that the person in my life who's got this personality disorder is the problem. It's not me. It's safer to be here. And stops them from being in a loving relationship. And a lot of them already know this. And a lot of them can also feel this degree of guilt of oh, well, I can't leave them because they have mental health issues. That's just manufactured guilt. Manufactured guilt, as opposed to what I define as guilt, is where if guilt is, I feel like I violated a value of mine, manufactured guilt is more anxiety. It's like this whole thing of, I'm a bad person if I leave this person with issues behind. Yes, your feelings are valid, but it doesn't mean you're a bad person for not putting up with dysfunctional behavior. And that's where a lot of avoidants get it twisted, because they think that their worth is dependent on being a good person, on showing up for people who are needy, of feeling good about being useful. So that's their burden to learn to overcome in their own time. All right. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining me on this journey of reading Susan's letter, talking about emotional unavailability, and being part of this Q&A. This was fun. It was good to be back on these lives. I hope that all of you have a wonderful, wonderful day wherever you may be. The episodes of Ken Reads will continue, provided that I am able to obviously maintain my boundaries around my own work and also enjoy self-care on the side, but it's going so well so far. And I also want to say that I am loving the letters that you guys send in. Again, not because they're fictitious, but because I enjoy reading and providing validation for all of you too. Last thing I want to say before I go is, I hope that by reading out these letters, it's given you people a sign of just how a lot of this stuff, even if the dates change, the people are different, the circumstances are slightly adjusted, the themes are the same. The result is usually inevitable, and it usually comes to a crashing halt in very similar ways each and every time. And also, tomorrow's letter, which I've already recorded, shows a dimension that is so fundamentally different from a lot of the letters that I have read, where there's real signs of, potential personality disorder stuff, addiction to the nines. And when people are quick to just be like, oh, well, I think they're not avoidant at all, they're just a narcissist or they have BPD, it may be true in your case that is an experience that you've had where they have intertwined and overlapped, which is, in my opinion, very much what's going on in tomorrow's letter. But I hope that by illustrating these, you can see how there's often, whilst there are very similar themes, also at times there can be, ranges of severity that also play out too. But I want to also make sure that everyone understands we ain't doing comparison games here. Just because you're all drowning, one person's drowning at 9 feet and another person's drowning at 3 feet, doesn't mean any one of you are better off. You're both drowning. But sometimes the person at 9 feet has some additional challenges. All right. Take care, everyone, and I will be back again very soon.